The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
All right, most times when I log in, I'm the better dressed person. But in this case, you look like $1 million and you are the better dressed person. So anyway, hey, listen, everybody. Today is a episode and a guest that honestly I've been wanting to bring on, for well over a year now. I think I reached out to him well over a year ago through Instagram after seeing so many amazing clips of him. But we are going to have a conversation with Miko Peled today. And by the way, do you pronounce your last name Peled?
Peled.
Peled. Okay, Miko Peled. And this is probably going to be one of the most insightful, raw, and real episodes I've ever done, because Miko is one of the most insightful, real, and raw guests that I've ever had. And I'm going to take 2 seconds to read this bio, because for all of my audience that's not familiar with you, I really want to set the stage. So here's the quick background. Miko was born into an elite, distinguished Zionist family. His grandfather, Avraham Katznelson, did I pronounce that correctly? Avraham Katznelson signed Israel's Declaration of Independence. That's crazy. His father, General Mati Peled, is it Mati? Is that how you pronounce your father's name? Okay. General Mati Peled fought in 1948 and 1967, 2 dates we're going to talk about, and later became a peace advocate. Miko himself joined the IDF Special Forces, earned a Red Beret, then quit after the 1982 Lebanon War. He switched to karate, found nonviolent practice, that's amazing, and eventually moved to San Diego, where he set up a school and earned a 6th degree black belt. Wow, okay, nobody's going to be messing with you. And then a tragedy changed everything. His 13-year-old niece, Smadar, did I pronounce that one?
You're good with the names.
All right, I'm doing the names, was killed in 1997 suicide bombing in Jerusalem. This was the spark, drove him into interfaith dialogue and activism, ultimately becoming a fierce critic of the occupation and proponent of Palestinian rights. Okay, that is insane. I mean, that is insane that you really came from what I feel is like one of the royalty Zionist families, and now you are absolutely advocating, and you've been doing so for so long, for Palestinian rights. So first of all, what happened and what caused you to have such a polar shift?
Well, thanks for having me on your show. First of all, it's a pleasure to sit and chat with you. And really, the last chapter of the bio is where I'm sitting right now at Palestine House of Freedom here in Washington, D.C., which I founded and I am the director of. Of course, I founded with a host of Palestinian comrades and support for Palestinians on the ground in Palestine. And so we're here right on Capitol Hill. We've got the Palestinian flag displayed on Pennsylvania Avenue, and we're very proud of that. And we just had an event here with some rabbis, a priest, and an imam talking about Gaza. Just finished right now.
That's amazing.
So that's the final chapter. Like you read in the bio, I mean, when I was raised to be a Zionist. I was raised to be an Israeli patriot, with the kind of family that I had, it's almost a given. It's a given. I mean, really, you don't learn about Israel and Zionism in a textbook. You eat it, you drink it. It's in your mother's milk. It's on every dinner around the table. Every dinner, that's everything that's discussed, when you have that kind of family, all family gatherings, nobody talks about anything but the state and so forth, and Zionism. And then I believe that as humans, the thing that causes us to change our perspective dramatically, is usually something terrible. There's usually something so horrible that it shakes us to a point where we can no longer accept what we thought was true, and we have to investigate and expand our understanding and our knowledge of the world. And that's what happened to me. I mean, you carry the coffin of a 13-year-old girl to her grave. That's not something you can just forget. And then the next day you go back to work and life is the same. It's never the same.
Yeah.
And so it drove me to not only myself, but, and my sister, her husband, and so on. But it drove me a little bit further, but to get in touch and talk to the other side. I believe that what happens, because there's so much violence. And really what people hear about when we talk about Palestine, Israel is violence.
Right.
We don't hear about anything, other than the violence. So we go through this list of occurrences, list of attacks, list of people being killed, lists of tragedies and horrors that it becomes just, you become completely detached from it. What I like to do is like to stop and say, well, look what happened. This was the September the 4th, 1997. 3 young Palestinians took their own lives and the lives of Israelis, civilians, kids, whatever, on that street in downtown Jerusalem. How does that happen?
Yeah.
How could that possibly happen? What kind of reality has to exist for something so terrible? And then, of course, since then, there were so many others. And before there were so many others. But let's just talk about the one, and I researched this and I've written about this and so on. But the bottom line is that the power exists in the hands of Israel. The reality that was created throughout the entire country, which I refer to as Palestine, but some people still call it Israel. The reality in that entire country was changed dramatically since the creation of the state of Israel. And from that moment on, nothing but violence and bloodshed and horror has been taking place, not only there, but in the region as well. So it's probably the most destabilizing factors in the modern history of this region. So Israel created this reality where the oppression, the lack of respect for human life, the lack of respect for people's dignity towards the Palestinian is so severe that something so horrible can take place. Now, mind you, the vast majority of Palestinian resistance to this reality has not been armed resistance, has not been violent resistance, has been many, many other ways. And this is something that we portray a lot here at Palestine House of Freedom. We talk about that a lot. This entire experience of how Palestinians have expressed their resistance. But sure, armed resistance has always been a part of it. And this particular type, the suicide bombing phenomenon, was very, very short. And so I had to find out. Well, I was living in America, so I came back here, and I thought I got to talk to somebody. Now I was living in Southern California. Nobody wants to talk about the Middle East when you live in sunny San Diego. Everybody's busy having fun, going to the beach, making money, But finally, at last, I found there was this phenomenon at the time called living room dialogue groups, and you could find them everywhere. But there was one in San Diego that I found. And it was unique because these were all like hardcore activists, and it was called Jewish-Palestinian Dialogue, which is really it shouldn't be called that because there's no problem between Jews and Palestinians. It's the Zionists and the Israelis and the Palestinians, but that was how it was framed. And we would meet in each other's homes once a month, and people would just tell their stories. It was not an accusatory. It was not a debate. It was not an argument. It was people telling their stories. And I'm sitting there with these Palestinians, and, I come from a family like mine. I know everything.
Yeah.
I know the truth. I know everything. I mean, look where I come from. Look, this is my whole life. And they're telling me that day is night, night is day. They may as well have been telling me that the earth is flat. Now, some other Israelis and some other Jewish people would listen to the Palestinian story, tell their stories and leave and say, oh, they're liars. They're anti-Semitic. It's all some kind of conspiracy. I'm sitting and looking at these people. I'm going, they can't all be lying. They're telling a very similar story. Something is wrong here. So I began to do my own research. And at that time, this is around 2000, 2001, several Israeli historians had come out they were called new historians. They rewrote what happened when the state of Israel was established in 1948. And what they revealed was, because they were able to go into the state archives and the army archives, because a lot of documents were opened after 50 years or whatever it was. And they basically validated what Palestinians have been saying all along, there was a genocide. There was a campaign of ethnic cleansing that was very well planned. It was a massive force, very well trained and very well armed on the Israeli side. And there were just Palestinian civilians basically on the other side that had no weapons and no support whatsoever. And that's it. Between the end of 1947 and the beginning of 1949, so a little over a year, Palestine was wiped out, gone.
Wow.
Almost 1 million Palestinians exiled. God knows how many were killed. And that's it. The country changed its name to Israel.
And so here's one of the things that I'd love to clear up. Who enabled that? Was it the British Was it Harry S. Truman, who was the president of the United States? I have a great clip that I found from 1948, and I might insert it here, where President Truman literally talks about having to divide Palestine. He talks about, I had to make the Jews happy. I had to make the Arabs happy. It's not easy to move out millions of people and move in millions of people.
That decision to recognize Israel is an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs. But when you go into a thing of that kind, the people you help most are the ones that get most angry with you. Both of them were against me on the situation, but as President of the United States, I paid no attention to them, carried out what I thought was right, and I had the support of the Congress, and I could do it, which is unusual in these days.
Could you tell us specifically that a lot of Jewish people were against you, too?
Oh, well, there were a lot of Jewish people against me because they wanted the whole of Palestine. As I say, they wanted to drive all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
People don't understand this is how it happened. And so this is why Palestinian people are so pissed off, because in 1948, they literally got moved out. Were the British behind it? Were the Americans behind it? Was it a combination?
So before I answer that question, I just want to say a little episode. One of the rabbis that was here just now speaking, he was talking about the fact. So there's always been a Jewish community in Palestine, and they saw themselves as Palestinian Jews. The Zionists were Jews that came from Europe, that came from outside. Kind of the old Jewish population in Palestine lived very well, and they had good relations with the Palestinians. They were the minority. The Muslims were the majority. Then the next minority were Christians, and the Jews were, a little bit less. But everybody got along, and they would babysit each other's children, and they would work together and so forth. And the Jews never expected or demanded sovereignty. They were quite happy to live as citizens of whoever the government was. And Jewish law also prescribes that that's what you need to do. As a Jew, you need to be a good citizen, you need to be loyal to your country, and that sort of thing. Because Jews are a religious minority that lives everywhere. The Zionists came, they were secular, they were not from Palestine, they came from outside. They were supported by the British, and they suddenly brought death and destruction and conflict and hate and bloodshed to Palestine. So it's not the indigenous Jewish community of Palestine that was responsible for this. It was people from the outside, settlers, colonizers that came.
Got it.
So it was the British, and then they supported the Zionist idea. Now, just to give it a little more background, the Zionist movement began really to grow at the beginning of the 20th century. It started at the end of the 19th, but really the beginning of the 20th century, it began to grow. And there was a whole cadre of leaders, young, educated, smart, well-spoken. My grandfather was one of them, who traveled around the world to speak to the leaders around the world and to convince them to support the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. Basically, that's what Zionism is.
Yeah.
I actually have a poster of my grandfather speaking somewhere in around the world. And because they didn't look Jewish, these people were all had shaved their beards. They were secular. They spoke several languages. They were highly educated. They're very impressive people. The powers that be at the time, in the U.S. too, but mostly then in Europe, were impressed. They said, yes, why not? This is a good idea. Let's colonize. Let's send the Jews over to this other place. We solve all the problems. We get rid of the Jews, and we can collaborate with this secular Western Jewish colony that we create for ourselves as an ally, in the heart of the Arab world, in the heart of the Middle East. And they did a very good job. The Zionists did a very good job. And that's why to this day, more than 100 years later, they have a great deal of influence in politics, in the media, in popular culture, in education. They take a good look. There's all these Zionist organizations around every state checking, social studies textbooks, making sure the language is right and so on. And they've done this. They've done a very, very good job. So then they created a reality in which here in America, in the UK, and in the West, basically, people grow up with a Zionist education. So they know about Israel, they know about the Bible stories, they know about the Holocaust. Ask them about Palestine, they confuse it with Pakistan.
That's interesting.
There's no Palestine in it in textbooks. There's no Palestine in the history books. My kids in high school took, AP World History. It's basically a book this big about everything from when the world began till today, right?
Yeah.
They study it in high school. There's no Palestine, maybe as an ancient name or something like that, but there's all this stuff about Israel. So that's the result of all this really incredible work by the Zionists, that they were able to get this influence. There was no counter to that. There's never been a counter to that.
Right. Can you really quick define, that another piece of confusion is Zionism. Can you define Zionism and then differentiate it from Judaism? Because I think that right now is what America is waking up to. The world gets it a little bit better, but I think America is waking up to, wait a minute, there's Zionists and then there's Judaism. Can you help us understand that?
Sure. So Zionism is an ideology that basically says the Jewish people have a right from all over the world, have a right to go to Palestine and take over and create their own state and support that idea. That's in a sentence, that's what Zionism is.
Okay. And what gives them that right? Is this the hey, 3,000 years ago we were promised this land? What gives them that right?
So this is what's interesting. The Zionists, especially the early Zionists, were all secular.
Okay.
They left Judaism, they left religion, but they felt they wanted their own place. But on this issue, they go back to the Old Testament and they say, God promised us the land. So what they did is they secularized Judaism.
Yeah.
Is really blasphemous. I remember talking to this rabbi about this and he started laughing. They said the Jewish people are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews from thousands of years ago, which is not really true. Then they said the Bible is not a book of faith, it's a history book, which is of course nonsense. And then they said our homeland as Jews is Palestine, which by the way, 1,000,000 years ago may have been called Judea or Israel or something like that for a very short time in its history, right? Going back as 4,000 years, it's been called Palestine, but never mind that. So they put these three things together. So Jews are not anymore a religious minority that has multiple nationalities, because you could be an Arab Jew, an African Jew, a European Jew, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have nothing in common with one another except your faith. So I said, no, we're all one nation, just like in the modern sense of the word. Then they said the Bible is our history book, the Old Testament. It's not a book of faith. Forget all the God and all that nonsense. It's a book of history, and Palestine is our homeland, and we have a right to go back. Now, Protestant Europe and Protestant America loved that. It spoke to their own sense of how the world should be.
Okay.
Really, that's the beginning of Zionism. Zionism began with the Protestant world before it even became a Jewish thing. So then, that's what the Zionists did. They created this new thing, which didn't exist. Now, Jews at the time, originally, had come out very strongly against Zionism. In the year 1900, all the important rabbis around the world published a booklet in Hebrew for the Jewish people, warning them of the dangers of this idea of a Jewish state. And what they said was, simply put, a Jewish state will create discord, will bring about discord between the Jews and Arabs and Jews and Muslims who had very good relations. It will bring bloodshed and violence to the Holy Land, and it will cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews in the countries in which they live, because Jews live around all these different countries and they're citizens of all these different countries. Now, suddenly, people will start doubting their loyalty. Are they loyal to this or that? Now, all these three things these warnings came out in the year 1900. They all came true. That's exactly what happened. Violence, discord between Jews and Arabs and Jews and Muslims, which historically never existed. They're always good relations because they're sister faiths. And people cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews and where they stand. So Jews came out against this idea of Zionism very, very early on. And the Jewish community in Palestine in particular, when the state was established, when the UN ratified this idea of a Jewish state in Palestine, they wrote to the United Nations saying, we want no part of this. We don't want to be citizens of the state. These are not our people. They came from outside. They're secular. They've got all these ideas, and it's only going to harm us. So that's the difference. Judaism is a religion, and Jews lived as a religious minority around the world, and that's that. Zionism is this very particular, very racist, very supremacist ideology that says that all Jews around the world have a right to go to Palestine and take the land and make it their own.
Yeah, and just take what they want, which is happening in the West Bank, and we'll talk about that in a second. That timing, I'm glad you laid that out because, again, I'm a total outsider to all this stuff. And so I've really tried to learn, and it's pretty interesting how things have lined up. You talked about the early 1900s, and then in 1909, Cyrus Scofield gets commissioned to write the Scofield Bible, which it really tried to weaponize Christianity, ironically, with the Protestant American Christians in the United States, which quite frankly has become the entire baby boomer generation right now. Like everyone over the age of 60 in the US who's Protestant or even Christian, and maybe many Catholics, I think they were indoctrinated with this Scofield Bible version, which basically talked about this dispensationalism concept and keeping the Jewish people as God's chosen people in order to benefit the modern day state of Israel, which again, we've got the 1917 Balfour Declaration going all the way to the formation of 1948. I'll tell you what, man, it was a unbelievably well thought out marketing strategy and well executed marketing game plan because it worked. It absolutely worked. What did you think did you see the Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz interview where he kind of exposed him for not even knowing Genesis, 12:3 and what verse of the Bible, and then dictating his whole foreign policy? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, he made him look like the fool that he is, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's rare to see these buffoons exposed. That Tucker Carlson just exposed them in a way that he can never come back from. I don't think he can ever come back from that. I mean, he really exposed them, and he can't even say that he's like a lefty or a socialist or anything like that because it's Tucker Carlson. We all know that he's not. Yeah. I thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was great. I mean, guys like him are bought and sold by the Zionists, and they don't need to know, and they don't care to know.
Right.
You know, and that's the problem in politics in general. But now in American politics, there's this culture of not feeling that you have to know anything. I mean, even I've had several experiences here in Washington where I've met members of Congress that are good people, that are, caring people, that, just because they appreciate how important their role is. And when they're challenged on Palestine, the look on their face says, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You vote on these issues. You send money and weapons. How can you not know? And it's always very illuminating just to see that. But that's the reality. I mean, there's no need to know. There's no desire to know. And on the part of people who are maybe better people that do serve in Congress and so on, sometimes there's just no time because they have a priority is their constituents and not necessarily the Palestinians.
And I think organizations like AIPAC do such an incredible job of not only courting, but really influencing, the entire Republican Party for the most part. I think Thomas Massey and maybe Rand Paul are the only two guys that push back at all and don't accept money from AIPAC. Let me ask you this, being in DC, do you get, I guess, I don't want to say confronted, but as a person that comes from one of the most distinguished Zionist families of Israel, does AIPAC mess with you? Do any of these organizations mess with you guys?
Not yet, no. It's very interesting because even before we founded this place and opened, anyway, and we're, one of the purposes was to have a high profile Palestine-centered location. So we're not in some basement in Virginia. We're in Capitol Hill, and the flag is right on Pennsylvania Avenue, and that was the purpose. But that was part of the fear for a lot of people to say, now you're exposed. And I'm going, well, we have to be exposed, otherwise we can't do our job. But we haven't had, knock on wood, any problems. And even going back before this, I've become kind of a public figure on this issue. I speak around the country. I speak around the world. I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of incidents I've had where people came to disrupt or tried to cancel my events or anything like that. Yeah. So I can't say that I've, I suffered from the wrath of the Zionists. I think by and large, somebody at some point, I think, made a decision to leave me alone.
Yeah, probably because you're a sixth belt black belt.
That's what I do.
All right, I'm gonna jump around a little bit because now I'm kind of in the flow and I'm comfortable. Okay, let's talk about guys like Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, I think that's his first name. These right-wing Likud party guys. I've watched a couple incredible documentaries, and the one that I watched that was unbelievably insightful was the Bibi Files. And it really kind of exposed how, I've always thought it's Netanyahu driving the ship with this stuff. I'd like your thoughts on, quite frankly, how much power he really has. And then let's talk about this Likud party and what they're all about. And then the third thing would be the people in Israel. What are they thinking right now?
Okay, so you rounded that up really well. So that's really good. So let's start with Netanyahu. The reason he's been prime minister for so long is because he's the best politician there around. He's the best horse trader. He became prime minister once, even when his party did not win a majority. He created a reality where nobody else was able to create a coalition, because it's a parliamentary system. You have to create a coalition with other parties. And he became prime minister even though his party didn't win, because the other side couldn't create a coalition, because he knows how to bargain. And he's been around for a long time, and he's a very powerful guy. So he's powerful. He's like the only adult in the room in Israeli politics, as much as I hate to say that. And he's got this charisma and so on going. And so that's Netanyahu, and he's going to stay in power as long as he can sit in his chair. I mean, there's no one can challenge him. That's clear. Now, he is not the issue, though, because if we compare him to every other prime minister since the founding of the State of Israel, in terms of the policies, in terms of the objectives, in terms of the ideology, where this country's supposed to go, where the state's supposed to go, there's no difference. The very first prime minister of the State of Israel presided over one of the worst ethnic cleansing and genocidal campaigns in the history of the region. That was in 1948, the Nakba, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So, people look back and say, oh, those were the days. What do you mean those were the days? And from that moment on, the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of the Palestinian people has been part and parcel of every policy of the State of Israel, and also creating as much dysfunction around the region and destabilizing the region. So every few years they would start a war. Every few years they initiated a war or some kind of a military operation or something to stir things up. And so that's that. On that, Netanyahu is just the natural successor of every other prime minister. Now, you have, even within, so it doesn't really matter who prime minister is, doesn't matter which party is in power on this issue. The only difference is maybe language or cosmetics. The reality is they all agree to the genocide. They all agree of what's happening in Gaza. Some argue that they should do a better job in trying to get the Israeli hostages back. But that's really that's the argument. On the larger picture, on the genocide in Gaza and all that, there's no argument. And this reflects Israeli public. I mean, the Israelis vote in very high numbers, and Israeli House of Representatives, the Knesset, represents the people very, very clearly. And so now you've got these people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, which come from this very, very radical, violent ideology. And here in America, there's an organization that's been coming up and, showing up in protests and so forth called Betar. Betar was really the genesis of the Likud party. And it's also the genesis of the settler movement, where they went into the West Bank and took over and built, all these these settlements with the most radical, I want to say, bloody kind of population, very racist, very violent population. And they have a soccer team, and their fans are known to be the most violent, the most racist. So Betar has a history going all the way back to when it was founded, probably early 20th or late 19th century, has a violent fascist kind of movement. And it's a youth movement too. I mean, they've got a youth movement, they've got a soccer team, they've got a presence, they've got political parties. And the Likud is today really the representatives of Betar. But in the settlements, places where people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich grew up, they were allowed, they had a free hand to do whatever they want with the Palestinians. So they can kill, they can cuss, they can destroy, they can steal homes, they can do whatever they want in the West Bank. It was the Wild West. And that's where these guys come from. So in Israeli society, you've got these two camps. You've got the camp that hates those people because they believe Israel is kind of a liberal democracy. They don't oppose what's happening in Gaza. They don't oppose annexing, but they just don't like the cosmetics of it, because these guys are really ruffians. These guys are gangsters.
Yeah, these guys are rough. I mean, they're gangsters.
And mind you, they're gangsters because they've got the state behind them. If they
Right.
were not, they're not so brave if you put them in the street. But that's kind
Right.
of the reality of it. They're gangsters. And then you've got, like I said, so you've got these two parts of the society. One part that loves that kind of mentality, the other kind that thinks we should be a little bit more polite. But by and large, overall, in terms of strategy, in terms of the direction of the state, there's very little dissent on the issue of the land, on the issue of the Palestinians, and that's really the reality. So even though there is the different mannerisms, they're all going in the same directions, and they basically agree on the direction.
Okay, got it. Let me ask you this. Do these guys, whether it's Gavir, Smotrich, Netanyahu, or the average person in maybe Jerusalem more than Tel Aviv, I mean, when they're seeing the things I'm seeing on my phone with, last week a child had his arm blown off and they're trying to tend to him without anesthesia on a dirty street. They're seeing the starvation that's happening. Does it just not register with these people? That's what I have a hard time with. Like I understand supporting your side. And I've said 100 times on this podcast, although I don't respect Netanyahu as a human being, as a politician, he's excellent. He's absolutely excellent. But the question is, him in particular, because he is so intelligent, he's seeing all this stuff. Does it just roll off his back? It's just so hard to look at this and not feel like, okay, you know what? This has got to stop. Let's figure this out. Like, I don't get the mindset.
You're not supposed to. You're not a racist.
Yeah. Okay.
You're not supposed to. It's like a sickness. You can't understand it. You're not supposed to be able to understand it. That's exactly the difference between racists and non-racists. Racists, their brain works differently. They look at a genocide and they're not moved. They love it. They want to do more of it. They want to see the Palestinian people die. Israelis, by and large, that's kind of, some are maybe a little bit more, like I said, polite than others and don't want to see it. But the reality is, this has been what Israel was about from the very beginning, and the education system in Israel is such that it not enable it, it cultivates this.
Cultivates it.
Racism. But when people look at it and they say, I don't understand, we're not supposed to understand racism. Racism is a disease. It's something terrible. And we can't understand it unless you're a violent racist person. There's no way to understand it. It's impossible to understand. You have to end it. World War II, the world knew Nazis have got to go.
Yeah. You
can't negotiate a ceasefire. You can't partner with them. They've got to go. It wasn't enough to send aid to the concentration camps, right? Which is what I think the parallel with what's happening in Gaza now, saying, we need to send humanitarian aid from God knows where. No, sure they need aid, but they don't need to be sent aid from America. Palestine is a very rich country with resources. Just open the gates of this concentration camp, this death camp, and let people access the resources, the hospitals, the water, the food. It's right there, a 5-minute drive out of Gaza, But this is something that these people look at and they think is fine. They created it and they want to see more of it. And that's the problem. And so we look at it and we go, how could you possibly allow this to happen? And it's so close. It's a small country. 2 million people living in that death camp now. 2 million people. It's not like a small, and nobody, and there's a point on the, because there's Gaza was created as a concentration camp. So there's like a fence around it. There's a border. And there's a point where there's a little hill and Israelis go to this hill. And I've been there and you can see the bombs falling and they stand there and they cheer. It's a disease that's just terrible. And that's why you have to get rid of it. You have to absolutely get rid of it. You have to dismantle it. You have to replace it with a real democratic, free Palestine on all of Palestine with equal rights. That's it. And then, of course, you have to supply the Palestinians with all the aid and so forth that they need, which is tremendous.
Yeah, I don't even know how they're surviving. You're not an advocate of the two-state solution, correct? And no. Before you answer, again, I didn't know anything about this region, this conflict, this anything until October 7th happened. And then even then, I'll be very honest, when that day happened, I remember it was a Saturday and I started looking, I was like, oh, this is terrible. Whoa, God, this Hamas must be horrible. I didn't even really know anything about Hamas. And so you start to educate yourself as it went on. It has now become apparent to me and I would love your take on this, I really feel like Netanyahu let October 7th happen. Whether he had a part in it or not, that's debatable. But I think the 6 hours it took for the IDF to respond, where every 5 feet, supposedly there's a checkpoint. I'm being a little facetious, but you get my point. I feel like he let that happen in order to enable everything that's happened since then. Because without a awful situation, it's kind of like 9/11. Without those towers falling and that happening, that could not have enabled a 20-year forever war and invading Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think October 7th was, I don't know if I'd call it a false flag, but a staged event or an event that was let to happen in order to let what's happened since?
No, absolutely not. Let me give you some historical context. October 7th, 2023 was exactly 50 years and 1 day after the October 1973 war, Middle East war.
Mm.
And I don't think it's a coincidence. Now, on October the 6th, 1973, the Israeli military, because of hubris, because of the fact that they thought the Arabs wouldn't dare, because that they looked down at the Arabs and their capabilities and so forth, the Egyptian and Syrian armies advanced, massive forces advanced and caught Israel by surprise. And by then, of course, the Israeli military was hailed as one of the greats, and the Israeli military intelligence and the Mossad and everything. And with all that, it took days for them to start, calling up reservists and this and that and this and that and this and that. And there were warnings. There were intelligence warnings. Mm-hmm. But the hubris was such that they couldn't imagine the Arabs would dare. Now, here's an example of how incompetent they are, okay? Today, the Suez Canal has bridges that connect it with the Sinai Peninsula. In those days, there were no bridges. The Egyptian military Corps of Engineers built bridges overnight. Israeli soldiers were in bunkers along the Suez Canal. And they were asleep while these bridges were being built, and then all these massive Egyptian forces surprised them.
Wow. Okay.
So 50 years and 1 day later, a bunch of fighters from one of the poorest, most oppressed, most surveilled areas in the world, place where, a glass of water was a luxury, clean water.
Yeah.
This is before October 7th. They came out and basically completely paralyzed the state of Israel. A paralysis which they still have not recovered from, by the way.
Yeah.
Completely paralyzed them. People did not know what was going on. The police, the military, the government, the press, citizens, nobody knew what was going on. It took them days to recover. And the reason was, and this was even revealed by a top military intelligence guy who had just retired, it did not fit their concept. The Palestinians in Gaza wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare. They were expecting maybe an attack from Hezbollah in the north, from Lebanon, this and that. The Palestinians in Gaza, they wouldn't dare. They're nobody. Hamas is nothing. They would never dare. And they stood up and they did what nobody was ever able to do. No military has ever been able to do that, to completely paralyze and cast huge fear, horror in the minds of Israelis. They took over practically all of southern Israel. They took over 20 different cities and settlements in the south. I mean, they did something nobody ever thought, and it took a long time. And look, even today, the Israeli military is still fighting them, with all the destruction and so on. So I don't believe that this was as hard as it is to believe, because you're right. I mean, there's the surveillance and there's the military and there's this and there's that, but none of that helps when the hubris is such that you look down at the other side. And that's exactly what happened in 1973, in October 1973, and that's exactly what happened again in October of 2023. It's the hubris, it's the fact that they look down at Palestinians and Arabs in general, and they, like I said, the paralysis and the damage that was done to the state of Israel has not. I think it's irreparable. I don't think they will ever recover. And then the Yemeni forces closed the Straits of Bab el-Mandab, completely shutting down the port of Eilat, which is a very important port, and damaging and hurting the Israeli economy like no one was ever able to do. And the Yemenis have paid a heavy price. The Americans, the Israelis have been attacking them, bombing them.
Yeah.
And they're holding on. And I remember being interviewed.
They're holding on. It's crazy how these guys survive so much. Even Hamas and Hezbollah, it's like every time I look, I'm like, okay, they just wiped out the leadership. Oh, they just wiped out the leadership again. But they seem to hang on. That's the stuff that very, very candidly doesn't make sense to me unless America and Israel wants them to hang on, because you need a boogeyman. You need a big bad wolf. You need an enemy. I get it. I think maybe you don't think of it the way I do with that. And listen, I respect your opinion on that.
Look, I think that the reason organizations, groups like Hamas and Hezbollah hold on is because they are resistance organizations. They are there because of oppression. You can kill as many leaders of a resistance as you want for 100 years. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to stop. People want their freedom. People are looking in the Gaza Strip. People are looking out and seeing the wealth of Palestine, the wealth in which Israelis live, the wealth that exists everywhere, and they're living in a death camp. How are they not going to resist? So the reason they're holding on is because they have a legitimate cause that they're fighting for. What you're talking about is when suddenly they make China an enemy and they make Russia an enemy and they make this an enemy. That's the boogeyman. I agree with you on that.
Okay.
In the case of Palestine, the reason it exists is because there's popular support for the resistance. And there's a good cause for the resistance. People say, yeah, Hamas is the problem. There would have been no Hamas had there not been the oppression, had there not been Palestinians living in these conditions, there'd be no resistance, right? So if you want to end the resistance, you have to end the oppression. If you want to end the oppression, you have to dismantle the apartheid. We've seen this a million times. Everybody's invested in the obstacle to peace. Everybody's invested in the obstacle to peace and stability and democracy. That's what the U.S. is paying $4 billion a year for, to maintain the obstacle to stability and peace. Maybe that's the boogeyman. I don't know.
Okay. And these surrounding countries, I mean, what are your thoughts on, does Egypt give a shit about the Palestinians? Does Jordan give a shit about the Palestinians? Does Qatar actually care? What do you think of these Arab countries? You know, even Saudi Arabia and UAE, where, you know, their bread is buttered through the United States oil sales and then also the United States aid, where we're giving Egypt and Jordan, I know, you know, over $1 billion on a yearly basis. Does that incent them not to stand up for the Palestinians, or where do you think that all plays out?
Well, you have to see the difference between the governments and the people. So these are not democratically elected governments. And so they act in order to maintain their power.
Right.
They're looking around, and what are they seeing? They're seeing countries that agreed to work with Israel and work with the United States, and they're fine. And then they look at other countries that didn't, and they see Iraq and Libya and Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan, and they're saying, well, as leaders, which way do we want our country to go? Do you want to end in rubbles like Libya or Iraq? Or do you want to maintain our government and maintain our state, maintain our government, and receive money and weapons from Israel? I mean, from the United States. That's the decision they have to make. So it means they have to throw the Palestinians under the bus. The population is a very different thing. Because these are not democratically elected leaders, the people's voice is not being heard, is not expressed in government. And so the people, I mean, they support the Palestinian Arabs, have always supported Palestine, have always supported the Palestinian people. But their governments are different because the governments have they're completely detached from, and they don't need the support. They don't need the legitimacy of the people.
Of the people. No, exactly. You're absolutely right. What are your thoughts on the different administrations and how they've acted, especially being in DC? Like, what did you think about the way the Biden administration was handling Gaza? And then what do you think about how the Trump administration is handling things right now?
There's no difference. They're all supporting the genocide 1,000%. You know, it's completely complicit. American administrations have been completely complicit. It's horrible. And that's why so many Americans are so frustrated. Because of the complicity, because as an American, you're never a bystander, because it's our tax money and the people that we vote for,
right,
Washington, D.C., and then vote to send money to continue the genocide. So we, unless we stand up and shout at the top of our voices to end it, we're complicit. Because we vote for these people. And if these people think that they can take our vote and act like this, it's on us. We're the constituents. Right. We're the consumers of the media. We are the ones that are complicit. So Americans are never on the fence on this. You're either standing up and protesting and demanding it stop, or you're enabling it. And that's
Yeah.
the reality because of the massive support that comes from this country.
No, absolutely. And I think that for the first time in the history of this country, people are actually waking up and realizing what's going on. And they're realizing, wait a minute, why are we giving Israel all of this unequivocal support? And why are we doing this? And this is the problem. It's been such a well-oiled machine across so many different areas, whether that's media, the education system, but particularly religion. I mean, the weaponizing of Christianity and delve it down even to Protestants, which make up such an enormous percentage of the United States population, where they're almost been trained to think that Israel is still God's chosen people and we must protect Israel at all costs. And then you've got these coin-operated televangelist preachers like John Hagee and Franklin Graham and Kenneth Copeland and Paula White, who are just psychotic in their messaging. But the problem is they have millions of people that are buying into that. It's pretty insane, man. It's the greatest heist of all time. It's the greatest heist of all time. All right. How do you think it's going to end? What do you think is next?
Well, how it's going to end depends on us as constituents, as people of conscience. It depends on us. If we act, we can stop it. If we don't act, it's going to continue, and we're going to see the complete genocide of the Palestinian people and the destruction of Palestine. You know, we have a studio here and we have our own little YouTube channel. And so yesterday I was interviewing this gentleman from an organization called Grassroots Al-Quds, which is Jerusalem in Arabic, and it's an excellent organization. If you want to know what is happening in Jerusalem, really on the ground, it's a wonderful organization. It's grassrootsalquds.net, I think. His name is Yazan. He's the executive director. I've known him for many years.
And he's Israeli?
No, he's Palestinian.
Oh, he's Palestinian. Okay, got it.
And so, and I've taken. I know their tours. They give people tours kind of Jerusalem and hikes through the area and so forth to understand really what is happening in Jerusalem from a Palestinian perspective. And there's always been a process of de-Arabizing Palestine. And so if they find ruins, ancient ruins of a mosque or a church, it's negligible. When they find something that might have been a synagogue, that becomes a story. Or anything that legitimizes their story, their version of the history. So around Jerusalem, historical sites, Christian and Muslim historical sites, are being demolished and destroyed.
Yeah.
Including towns and neighborhoods that are ancient and have incredible histories are being destroyed, and settlements are being built for Jews only. It's happening in Jerusalem. It's happening throughout the country. So Palestine is being leveled. Thousands of years of history are being destroyed, and new things are being built, like in just outside the old city of Jerusalem. For anybody who's ever been there, they built what they call an archaeological park called the City of David. Now, nobody even knows for sure that there was a David, but they decided they're going to pretend that there's historical, historical data that shows there was a King David, and that particular. Now, there's a huge community there called Silwan. It's like 50,000 people. It's not a small place. And they're demolishing and destroying homes and recreating this archaeological fantasy. And settlers are coming into this community, throwing out the Palestinians from their homes that have been living there for, Silwan has a long history. It's a beautiful place, right outside the old city, right outside the walls. And everything is being demolished and destroyed, and settlers are coming in, and there's violence, Palestinians are being killed, and so on. So there's stuff happening. There's a process, and now it's heightened since October 7th because the world's attention is on Gaza. All these things throughout the entire country, not just the West Bank, but everywhere in the Galilee, in the south, in the Negev Desert, they are demolishing and destroying and demolishing and destroying. And the jewel in the crown, the thing that they want to destroy and change most of all, is to get rid of Al-Aqsa, this monumentally, incredibly important, historically significant, architecturally brilliant space called Al-Aqsa. It's been there for over 1,500 years. They want to destroy it in order to build some kind of a Jewish temple.
Is this the whole third temple that they talk about?
Yes.
Which again goes back to religion, and supposedly once you build that, that'll mean Jesus has a home and he can come back. Dude, it is so intertwined that they really have weaponized religion. Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
So that's what they want to do. They want to destroy. So destroying all these lesser known and taking over these lesser known monuments and sites.
Yeah.
paying attention. When it's Al-Aqsa, people pay attention a little bit more because they're, more than a billion Muslims who see it as a holy site. And it's a magnificent place. I mean, I've been to Taj Mahal, I've been to Notre Dame. It's nothing. It's 1,000 times more beautiful, 1,000 times more impressive. It's an incredible space. It's an entire, it's an entire compound.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's called. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's in Jerusalem?
Yeah. There's, the Golden Dome, what you always see in pictures.
Oh, yeah. Got it.
Right. It's a compound. It's about, I don't know, it's maybe a half a mile or a mile square. And there's mosques and colleges and schools, and there's a cemetery. It's a magnificent space. It's up on a hill. So they want that in the end. So they take all these, all these other places that people don't know about, little by little by little, and now they're allowing settlers to go into the mosque and just desecrate it and do all these things to instigate the Palestinians, to instigate violence, and they limit the access of Muslim Palestinians to this place to pray, because typically every Friday everybody goes there to pray. So Gaza is now the focus of the world's attention, but there's a destruction of history, of religion, of the legacy of 2,000 years in Palestine that is ongoing and is now being hyped because the world's not paying attention. And these things cannot be rebuilt. Once you destroy them, that's it. Gaza, the horrors, the bombing in Gaza, besides the human suffering, the historical monuments that have been destroyed, because the Gaza was a rich country, a very rich city going back thousands of years. The Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians. I mean, it has a history and archaeology that is incredible. It's destroyed and it can't be rebuilt. That's part of the process. Part of the process, and that's part of the horror of what is taking place. And again, you can't rebuild it. You can't bring it back. So I think you asked me how it ends. So if we participate and we demand, then the apartheid state needs to be dismantled, much like apartheid and other racist regimes around the world, and replaced with a free democratic Palestine over all of Palestine with equal rights for whoever lives there, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and so on.
And you're saying Israel gets renamed back to Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, it's been called Palestine for 4,000 years. And then it goes back to being the name it's not only the country that they changed the name, up until 1948, May of 1948, the world did business, commerce, traveled to Palestine forever. And it was called Palestine. Look at any map. Any map before 1948. It's always been Palestine. Suddenly, May 1948, boom, the world forgot and it became Israel. But that's not the only thing they did. They changed the name of cities. They're changing the name of streets. In Jerusalem, they changed the names of streets. In all the other Palestinian cities that they've taken over, they changed the name of the streets, of the neighborhoods, of other towns, and so on. So changing the name is part of the colonial project,
Absolutely.
Part of the erasure of the people. It's part of the erasure of Palestine. So of course they renamed it something new, but that doesn't mean they get to keep it.
Right. Oh man, can you go back to Israel? Like, have you been to Israel? Are you able to safely go there?
Well, first of all, I don't call it Israel. Like I said, I call it Palestine. And really, I invite people to call it Palestine because I think when we call it Israel, we're legitimizing the theft of Palestine. We're legitimizing apartheid. We're legitimizing the genocide. So I think it's important, and I invite people to use the name Palestine. But I used to go very often, of course, until October 7th. After October 7th, I've been advised by my activist friends not to come because if I go in, they probably won't let me out. I'll probably go straight.
Yeah, I could imagine. I can't see
but
you
up
being.
till then, I used to go all the time. In fact, October, I was planning to go with a few friends in October of 2023, and then last minute we canceled.
Got it. And then among your family, are you unique in your views and stances, or has your entire family, like, I think your mom is still alive, right? Your dad passed away, though.
My mom passed away a year ago. My dad passed away in 1995. Unique, I guess that's one way of calling it. My family right now, we can't speak to each other after October 7th.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's like impossible to talk. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Because they're obviously on the.
There's there's the whole range of opinions on this issue, but October 7th created such a rift, and my stance is decidedly on the Palestinian side, and that's it.
Yeah.
I refuse to call Palestinians terrorists. I refuse to call Palestinian resistance terrorism and so on. And so that created a very, very serious rift.
Got it. Got it. All right. All right. Listen, I just want to end with saying how much I appreciate you taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule. I think what you shared with us is a perspective that, is there's maybe a handful of people in this world that can probably provide the perspective you did. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to just tell you again, I told you this off camera and I want to say it on camera, just how much respect I have for you as a human being and as an individual to decide your truth and to decide what you think the right side of history and everything is. And quite frankly, to not stay silent about that and to really put yourself, on the front grounds of that, the front tier of that. So anyway, my hat is off to you if I was wearing one. And do you have anything you want to leave us with? Any other parting words?
Well, I'll say maybe two things. One is I think it's important to maintain hope. I think it's important to fight for what we believe is true. I think peace and stability and prosperity and life are possible in Palestine. I think we have to get up every morning doing everything we can to make sure that hope becomes real, a reality. And then, I published a book called The General Son. And that's kind of the story of the transformation. And it's kind of the story of the thing. And so if people want to know how that happens, so there's it's really a history of Palestine and Israel, I suppose, through my family story and stories of Palestinians that I've met. And that's kind of really, people find it a kind of a good kind of a, gateway to understanding Palestine and to seeing why I think the way I think and I do what I do. So if people want to check it out, and also PalestineHouseOfFreedom.org, if people want to check out our activities, we have events here. We're very busy. We're on social media, so please follow us and check us out.
That's great. I will put all those links in. That's funny. You stole my thunder on the ending because I was going to tell you, I just ordered your book and it's on its way and I'm looking forward to reading it, but I'll put the link for The General Son. What a great title, by the way. That is such a great title. And it's totally true, but I'll put a link for your book, your organization, your social media handles. All right, everybody. Great. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Miko, thank you again. It's been honestly a true honor and a pleasure. And maybe we can have you back on at another.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Hold on the line a second. All right, everybody, call a spade like Miko does.
This episode was brought to you by Zippix nicotine toothpicks. Zip more, smoke less. Totally satisfying, discreet, and delicious. Zippix nicotine-infused toothpicks are available in 6 great flavors, each containing at least 2 milligrams of nicotine to curb those cravings. Zippix is FDA registered and proudly made in the USA. Use discount code DSD for 10% off your order at zippixtoothpicks.com. Zip more, smoke less, save 10%.